Estamos aqui na nossa terceira live específica oferecida pela Imigrex Global, onde nós estamos explicando um plano B para a tua vida. Como que você consegue sair dessa lamaceira que você está aí no Brasil para você tentar uma vida melhor nos Estados Unidos. Você nunca vai abandonar o Brasil. Você sempre, eu tenho certeza que você, se você segue a mim, se você assiste a mim, vai ser preocupado com o Brasil a vida inteira. Mas você tem que se preocupar com a sua família. Por mais que a gente esteja aqui brigando para restaurar o mínimo de liberdade no Brasil, o Brasil não vai virar Estados Unidos, não vai virar a Europa do dia para a noite. E enquanto isso, seus filhos estão crescendo, enquanto isso você está submetido à violência, o seu negócio está sendo perseguido pelo governo, você está sofrendo as consequências desse país. Então, nós estamos fazendo essa terceira live, né? Fizemos uma segunda, uma quarta e agora essa sexta-feira para falar sobre projetos, planos para a sua vida de imigração, né, Lúdia?
Isso, e clica no QR Code, preenche o formulário, porque como nós falamos nas outras duas lives, você vai estar concorrendo, não é sorteio, você vai passar por uma avaliação da nossa equipe, que vai avaliar ali alguns casos para a gente oferecer uma consultoria gratuita. Essas consultorias da empresa, elas são pagas, mas excepcionalmente agora, como é lançamento, nós vamos selecionar algumas pessoas que nós vamos considerar mais elegíveis para oferecer essa consultoria gratuita. É só você apontar aí o teu celular para o QR Code e preencher o formulário, que de repente você recebe o contato do pessoal da equipe.
Bom, a gente prometeu que a gente ia responder as perguntas que foram enviadas, as mais comuns aqui sobre as questões imigratórias, mas para a gente responder essas perguntas, muito melhor do que nós respondemos, é o nosso advogado da empresa, um dos advogados, Robert Santos, que é importante dizer isso para vocês que estão em casa nos assistindo, apesar do Robert ser um advogado de imigração, a gente sempre faz o disclaimer legal de que a Imigrex não é um escritório de advocacia imigratória. Ela é uma empresa de consultoria de imigração e nós temos dentro da empresa de consultoria um advogado especialista nessa área. Eu queria dar as boas-vindas aí ao nosso queridíssimo Dr. Robert Santos.
Hello, greetings, and thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Ludmila, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in today and taking the time to learn a little bit more about the visa options that exist for those of you interested in moving to the U.S. So I have some questions here that have been highly requested, and I'm more than happy to provide some information about them so that you can make your best decision possible today. Thank you.
Bom, Robert, obrigado. Eu vou direto aqui começar a trazer as perguntas que as pessoas trouxeram. Uma pergunta que a gente recebeu muito foi na última live que nós falamos dos tipos de visto, né? E aí a gente falou visto imigratório, visto não imigratório. Eu queria te perguntar, que você explicasse melhor do que a gente, quais são os vistos de imigração permanentes para o sujeito obter o green card. Eu queria aqui entender sobre EB1, EB2NW, EB5, etc. Explica para a gente, por favor, Robert, a diferença e quais são os principais tipos.
To introduce the first employment visas, you would have your top tier priority EB1 employment visa, which is reserved for mostly individuals with extraordinary ability, multinational executives and managers, and your outstanding researchers and professors. You go down the list and there's a little bit more of a delay in backlog in processing times because it applies to workers with less prominence in their home countries or less skills. Then you have your EB2 category, also for advanced professors and researchers and individuals with exceptional ability. And therein is also the national interest waiver that exists to try to excuse applicants from not having to get a sponsor or undergo the labor certification process, which is a separate process handled by the U.S. Department of Labor. And then as you further go down, you have the EB3 category for your skilled and unskilled workers, also professional workers as well, where you'll be required to provide an employer sponsor and undergo the labor certification process. So that's a process that can take a long time because there's a lot of potential employees that want to get sponsorship with U.S. companies, and as a result, there's a pretty big delay caused by the limited quota of availability for those kinds of visas. EB4 is the next category of employment visas, and those are more for specialty occupations, religious workers, physicians, people who work in transit with the Panama Canal, for example. Not a very common visa type. And then lastly, you have an outside category called the EB5, which is meant for immigrant investors willing to invest a sum somewhere between $900,000 to $2 million in the U.S. into a company entity that's going to create 10 full-time jobs in exchange for permanent residency. So all of these have very different processing times, very different requirements. The difference is are you going to require a sponsor or not to explain your eligibility to immigrate.
Obrigada aí pela tua resposta, Robert, ficou muito bem explicado, aí o pessoal com certeza vai se aproveitar muito aí desse conhecimento que você está dando. Deixa eu fazer aqui mais uma pergunta então para você, Robert. Quais são os requisitos para a pessoa ser elegível ao visto EB2NW?
So the EB2 visa is a second-tier visa, and it basically breaks down into two pathways. Either you show immigration agency that you have or possess an advanced degree or are professional, an advanced degree being a master's degree, an equivalent of a master's degree in the U.S., or perhaps even a bachelor's degree with 5 years of progressive work experience in your field of specialty. That would be one route. The other route is if you do not possess a master's degree, then at least you're considered a person of exceptional ability, where you would be satisfying about 3 to 4 criterion out of 7 to show that you are really proficient in your field and that you have the documentation to support that claim. And I guess I would say the second stage of that visa would be determining whether you're going to go with an employer sponsor or not. Because if you do, you would be required to undergo the labor certification process. However, if you find that you are eligible for a national interest waiver, that waiver is a request to be exempted from having to undergo that labor certification process. And to summarize that process, it's basically a application that goes through the U.S. Department of Labor, where your employer has to claim that they attempted to try to find a qualified U.S. worker, but failed to do so for lack of supply. And because of a high demand for that position, they had to employ you, the worker from abroad. And so if you find that you are qualified enough, that your endeavor or your project in the U.S. is very high in demand or very much needed, or you're a very unique and exceptional individual with these skills, then perhaps you could qualify for a national interest waiver under the EB2 program. Now remember, this is a second-tier visa, which means there is a bit of a delay in processing a residency application for an approved EB2 visa. Remember, there's a quota for the number of individuals who can move to the U.S. as a permanent resident under this scheme. And so that would be a widely popular visa option. However, it's one that does carry a lot of requirements and a lot of evidentiary standards that have to be complied with before considering applying for that visa.
E EB5, Robert? EB5. A pessoa perguntou muito sobre EB5. Eu fiz muita piada aqui, fiz muita brincadeira, mas qual é o valor mínimo para o EB5? E qual é a diferença do EB5? Eu fiz efetivamente uma piada na nossa última live, mas eu quero saber qual é a diferença do EB5 para o E2, que é o visto de investidor de tratado e tudo mais.
So a small introduction to the EB5 Immigrant Investor Petition. This is a visa that allows for an individual to basically either start or acquire a company in the U.S. that is going to invest at least $800,000. And that's going to be dependent on where this business is located. $800,000 is for investment in any area that's considered a targeted employment area. In other words, an area with high unemployment, according to the state. If a person wanted to start a business in a more populated area like Orlando or Miami, the investment amount starts at $1,050,000. these funds have to be applied and used for necessary business expenditures, and most importantly, it has to be used to hire at least 10 full-time U.S. workers. If you can satisfy, those kinds of requirements, you would be granted a conditional permanent residency status, where when it comes time to renew it, USCIS is going to determine whether your business is still active, whether those 10 employees are still working, and whether you satisfied all the rest of the criteria necessary to be granted a permanent residency for 10 years. The EB-5 is definitely a more expensive option. It's more of a complex process. There are side options where you could still invest with a regional center. This is an investment group, to keep it simple, where they can take your investment partially as a loan and return it to you in time by using those funds for big infrastructure projects or big construction projects that directly or indirectly employ more than 10 workers. And so it's more of a passive way to qualify for the EB-5 immigrant investor visa. The difference between that visa and a more flexible one, which is called the E2 treater investor visa, the E2 is limited to nationals of countries that have a treaty with the USA. And so if your country is on that list of treaty holders, you would have access to a very flexible visa that allows you to determine how much capital you actually need to start your own business in the USA or acquire an existing business with the USA. The law doesn't state a minimum. So it would be up to your business plan to dictate how much capital you actually need to get this business going and to realize a profit in the next 5 years. And maybe best of all is that you're not required to have an employee in order to apply for this visa. The difference is that this E2 visa is a temporary visa. It's not a permanent residency. It would allow you to work for your company and stay in the U.S. much longer than the 6 months allotted to you as a B1, B2 visitor, but it's only limited to 5 years, 2 years if you do it from inside of the USA, and you can still renew it without limitation. However, it's not a process that leads directly to a permanent residency. You will need to find another basis to apply for permanent residency down the road, if that's your ultimate goal. But it's a good visa to buy yourself time or buy your family some time to find a new route for permanent residency.
Perfeito, Robert. Obrigada aí pela tua explicação. E agora eu vou mandar mais uma pergunta. Robert, quanto tempo que leva para a pessoa obter o green card para cada tipo de visto? Você poderia explicar isso melhor para a gente?
Breaking down the processing times for each employment visa or family-based visa, I mean, there are just so many different processing times, 2 different stages that we need to really consider. And so I just want to give maybe like the most average answer is you would expect about 2 years. And this is also assuming that you would be doing this entire process from your country of origin, right, your home country. When you're trying to file for an eligibility for a certain type of visa, you typically have to do that with USCIS, that is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That is the immigration agency that operates domestically in the USA. That's just one agency, however. If they perchance approve of your eligibility to later apply for permanent residency, depending on where you're located, you might have to then deal with the U.S. Embassy in your home country, which is a separate agency, or if you're already inside of the United States, you may be able to change your status from visitor to permanent resident or worker to permanent resident, depending on what's your lawful status in the U.S. And so remembering back to our conversation about which tier of employment visa or family visa you're under, for example, your EB-1 visa for a person of individual of extraordinary ability, that process, if that individual's outside of the USA, could take anywhere between maybe 8 to 12 months, the whole thing. in order to get their immigrant visa. This is assuming a lot of factors, but that's why I want to say the safe answer is typically it's going to be 2 years. The lower in the priority you go, EB2, EB3, the longer it's going to take. And that's only because U.S. Congress has instituted a limited number of visas for permanent residency available on a yearly basis. And so there's a quota. And once they meet that quota, then they get pushed on to the next year for individuals that are waiting. And so anytime that you have to think about which category am I in, how long is it going to take, your EB2, your EB3, I mean, there's a lot of applicants out there that are lower in priority, of course, with all the same, good skills and whatnot, and knowledge to apply for their job, but it's going to take longer because there's more of them that have to wait in line for their turn to become permanent residents.
A gente entende que tem essa variação e etc. É impossível dizer de forma certeira, mas a pergunta importante, muito nosso público aqui faz, e filho, familiar, como é que é o processo? Se você obtém um green card, seu filho está incluído no teu green card, seu cônjuge está incluído no green card, como é que é isso, né? No seu visto, na sua aprovação, como é que funciona?
When it comes to children, we want to make sure that all of our kids are included in any application or petition is submitted to the government to ensure that any benefit extended to us is extended to our family, our immediate family, our children. And so USCIS and the U.S. Embassy do allow that so long as your child is under 21 years of age. As soon as they reach 21 years of age, they're considered independent adults, no longer able to be receiving the immigration benefits that you as the parent would be receiving. There's a little bit of a calculation involved with, children who are 20, maybe 19, to make sure that they are also included in the process. But basically, the general goal is, yes, you want to include your children in any employment or family petition that's submitted to USCIS, include their name, date of birth, all of that, all of those essentials. Of course, it's easiest when the child is young and whatnot. And when your child is about 19, 20, a conversation with us would be a good idea to determine, is your child ultimately going to be included in that petition for residency later, even though they turn 21. In most cases, yes, but in slimmest cases, no. It really just varies on how long your petition is pending with USCIS and when that visa becomes ultimately available to you later down the road.
Tem uma outra pergunta aqui, Robert, que o pessoal está muito preocupado em relação à oferta de emprego. Se a oferta de emprego realmente é necessária ou não é. Você poderia explicar se realmente precisa de uma oferta de emprego para aplicar para o EB2NW?
Okay, so the EB2 National Interest Waiver does not require a job offer, employer sponsor, or labor certification. The whole basis of that petition is showing that you have either an advanced degree or are considered an individual with exceptional ability. And as a result, you should not be, let's just put it, inconvenienced with the labor certification process because, one, perhaps your job is very highly in demand and the delay caused by the labor certification process would not be a benefit to the country of USA. Otherwise, it could be that maybe your skills and talents are a very rare find, and you intend to perhaps start a business that is going to apply those skills, and you have the know-how and the resources to make it happen, perhaps by employing a lot of workers or a good number of workers in an area considered to have high unemployment. And so there's a couple of ways to show that it would be in the interest of the USA to waive that labor certification process, to waive having or requiring you to get an employer sponsor. But it's really all based on documented evidence that you provide to show your credentials, your skills, and why exactly is your work so important to the USA. And there's all kinds of work, there's all kinds of impact that you could have to the local, regional, or national economy. It's just, can you propose a plan that's going to have that impact? And does that plan have merit? With all those in mind, then perhaps you can qualify for that EB2 national interest waiver, which does tend to have, a little bit more flexible requirements than the EB1, but it's still up there. There's still some evidentiary criteria that has to be satisfied in the first place.
Ótimo. Outra pergunta que vem muito aqui é se a pessoa pode aplicar para o processo estando no Brasil, ou se tem que estar aqui nos Estados Unidos. Tem alguma forma da pessoa aplicar estando no Brasil, ou o sujeito tem que vir para cá como turista e depois mudar? Como é que funciona isso?
So there's two routes to eventually moving to the U.S. You can either be already inside the U.S. lawfully, mind you, and place an application to change your status from your current one to permanent resident, assuming you have eligibility and visa availability. The second option is applying, after you're done with the approval process with USCIS, you do it via consular processing, which means that you wait in your home country until there's a visa available, and where the U.S. Embassy will then invite you for an interview, look at your approval notice from USCIS for why you qualify as a worker or a spouse or a family member or whatever it is. And if all goes well, they're going to grant you what's called an immigrant visa. This looks very different from your B1, B2 visitor visa, but basically they put another visa in your passport that says, hey, this person has a window of time, usually 90 days, to come and move into the U.S. When you go through U.S. Customs at an airport, basically U.S. Customs officers are going to welcome you and say, hey, okay, you're going to be a new resident, great. We'll welcome you in. You'll get your permanent residency card in the mail about like 2 or 3 weeks after you move in, and you'll be set to go. This is an option if you choose to wait in your home country while this whole entire process plays out.
Perfeito. Agora eu vou entrar num assunto que sempre comove o pessoal, né? Vamos falar de valores. Robert, qual que é o custo de um processo de imigração? Fala pra gente.
So basically, different visa categories have different costs owed to USCIS, owed to the embassy, and also to our company as well, Immigrants Global, which can vary depending on which visa category you go with. I want to say that usually most filing fees start around $800 to about $1,500 flat. However, if you have the option to pay for a process called premium processing, this is an option that USCIS grants applicants to pay for about $2,800 to accelerate the processing time of your petition with them. This could reduce processing times from 14, 15 months down all the way to maybe 5 months. The reason is that for that $2,800, they're going to send you a reply in about 15 business days, maybe a little more depending on the visa category type, but they'll send you a reply, which typically means a request for evidence, or if you're lucky, they might send a decision right away. This accelerates the processing times to which you can get an approval so that you're closer in line for your visa down the road if you're interested in a permanent visa. And so filing fees with Immigrex can range anywhere between $6,000 all the way to $14,000, really dependent on how many applicants there are, including your family members, and which petition you're involved with. Each petition is different on a case-by-case basis. They have different types of evidentiary requirements, and we work closely with our clients to double check and verify that everything is going to be as compliant with the requirements as possible. And we're going to let you know throughout the process how we feel about your evidence to let you know what is the likelihood of success here. And so for the fees that we are being compensated with, we want you to know how comfortable and convenient of a process this is going to be so you can make the best decision possible.
É bom que na Immigrex o sujeito consegue economizar bastante em relação ao que as pessoas estão cobrando por aí, preços astronômicos, vejo pessoas cobrando aí mais de $30 mil já por visto, e ainda consegue parcelar, que é uma coisa importante, né? Mas eu queria uma das coisas que nos preocupa, que nos levou a fazer e a fundar a Imigrex, é a quantidade que eu vejo de visto negado, de tanta gente que cai aí na mão das pessoas erradas. Mas explica aí para as pessoas de casa assistirem quais são os principais erros que podem levar a uma negativa dos vistos.
So if we're talking about the first stage where you're applying for eligibility for a permanent or temporary visa later down the road, the primary mistakes we see committed are a lack of understanding about how to satisfy the evidentiary requirements for these visas. USCIS does not make it easy to find, but they do have policy manuals where they detail what exactly they're looking for in the evidence that applicants submit. And so I can give you a good example. We get a lot of requests for EB1 and EB2 applications, and in order to meet those standards, you have to show that you're a person of typically of exceptional or extraordinary ability. And we get an applicant who provides evidence of their accomplishments, and they have a lot of accomplishments, but they occurred maybe 10 years ago, and nothing ever since that time. And it basically tells USCIS that this person used to be a prominent figure in their industry, but maybe not so much anymore. Perhaps their career slowed down for many unknown reasons, and the applicant thinks that they can apply for this visa based on their past experience. And USCIS doesn't want to buy that, at least anymore. They want to see somebody who's recently accomplished, still ongoing, still providing significant impacts to their industry and field. And that's the kind of evidence that they want to see. So a lack of understanding about how to satisfy those evidentiary requirements, maybe just, a lot of documentation relies on corroborative letters from people who know you from your career, or letters from employers, and they don't know exactly what to say. There are certain magical keywords and language that USCIS likes to see in these letters. Especially, they want to qualify why exactly is this person writing this letter to us. Why are they so qualified? Why are they an authority? What do they exactly know about the applicant? And so we've seen all kinds of letters that maybe just say the basic lip service. They basically just recommend this person because they repeat what's on their resume or CV, and it just doesn't work. That's the bare minimum. And aside from that, or problems that can originate from that is an inconsistency that may come from what you provided on your application form versus what's found in your evidence. I'm not saying that USCIS does a very thorough job of evaluating every single piece of evidence you provide. Depending on how big or small your petition is, they may not see, all 500 pages. They might just flip randomly just to check. And they might look at your cover letter to see what do you have to say about this whole process. But if they find an inconsistency where, you worked at this company in 2008, but the application form says, no, you actually worked at this company in 2005, that could be an inconsistency that could lead to a request for evidence. And if you don't know how to clear that up with USCIS, that could also lead possibly to a denial, which will, end up rejecting your application, and then you'll have to start all over again from zero.
Em relação a esses erros, o pessoal tem muita dúvida ainda, Robert, se você puder esclarecer mais um pouco. Em relação àquelas pessoas que já receberam uma vez a negativa de visto, elas podem tentar novamente aplicar para o visto americano?
When you've had a petition denied, or perhaps even a visa application denied, it's not a bar or a prohibition to try again, or possibly even appeal that decision made by USCIS. USCIS is just a starting agency. There's agencies above that make grander or bigger determinations, or that can handle appeals based on the circumstances provided or evidence provided originally. They won't look at new evidence that you have later to submit, because you were supposed to submit that new evidence in the beginning. But they might disagree with the decision that USCIS made, maybe because the officer was reviewing it as too new, or didn't see all the evidence and missed it, and so that would be an unfair decision, and we can appeal that. What you have to keep in mind, however, is for the individuals who are inside of the United States applying for these petitions and getting denials, you have to make sure that you are lawfully in status in the U.S. Because if you are not lawfully in status, even if you submitted your petition before your current status expired, you don't have any more time to apply or submit an appeal or submit new petitions after your current statuses are expired. Because if you are allowed to wait in the U.S. while this appeal was processing, everybody would be in the United States reapplying and reapplying and reapplying until something happens or a positive decision is made. Yes, appeals can be reversed and they can be fixed later, even if you have to leave the USA. But you have to make sure that you're compliant with the law the entire time you're in the United States. And that's the most common situation we see with applicants who have had visa denials or petition rejections, is that they continue to stay and continue to appeal or reapply without realizing that you don't have a legal status anymore to successfully change from status A to status B, or status A to permanent residency. Once you run out of time and a decision has been made, you have to pack your things and go back to your home country. This doesn't apply to anybody who's in their home country and applying from their country of origin. You can continue to reapply as many times as needed. You can even submit multiple applications if you find it helpful, especially if there's like a new development that you didn't get to include in the original application. So you can continue applying. It's just, those filing fees are not refundable, so you'll have to keep paying those.
Robert, obrigado. Eu acho que não dava para ser mais claro que você foi. A gente fica aqui muito orgulhoso do teu trabalho. Obrigado, é muito legal te apresentar aí para a audiência. Eu acho que sai todo mundo aqui confiante e com uma luz no fim do túnel. Muito obrigado, viu?
Obrigada, Robert.
I hope this information was helpful. I wanted to thank you for, again, taking the time to hear us out, see what your options are. This little discussion was basically scratching the surface, and we definitely have a lot more information to offer you if you're interested. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Ludmila. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bom, você estava aí, ouviu o Robert. Essas foram algumas das perguntas. Talvez a gente pudesse ficar aqui conversando por muito mais tempo, mas você pode ter uma consultoria exclusiva para você. Você pode entrar aqui no nosso site, tá aqui o QR Code, tá aqui o link na descrição, tá aqui o link para você, querumplanob.com. Você vai entrar lá, você vai preencher absolutamente de graça o nosso formulário, etc. O seu caso será avaliado pela nossa equipe, que vai ver se você tem ou não condições de se aplicar para algum tipo de visto. Quando você preencher o formulário, a gente vai analisar, vamos entrar em contato com você e te dizer, você, caso para EB1, caso para EB2, caso para EB3, ou pô, não dá para você, ou pô, que você já pensou em Portugal, a gente vai entrar em contato com você. A reflexão que eu acho que as pessoas têm que fazer aqui, Lud, e abre aqui na gente, Otávio, a reflexão que a gente tem, que eu deixo para as pessoas de casa é: não perde tempo não. A vida aqui, a vida é dura, a vida nesse mundo é dura. As pessoas morrem, os casais brigam, os dissabores desse mundo só vão acabar depois que nosso Senhor Jesus Cristo voltar. Mas uma coisa que eu aprendi aqui nos Estados Unidos é que a vida não precisa ser tão dura. Você não precisa estar sujeito à tirania. Você não precisa estar sujeito a um governo que não quer, que trata o empreendedor como criminoso. Você não precisa estar submetido às leis trabalhistas ordinárias do Brasil que ferram o trabalhador. Você não precisa estar submetido a uma insegurança de você não saber que hora você vai voltar, de você parar num sinal de trânsito em grau de paranoia completa. Você não precisa ser submetido a trabalhar e não poder usufruir do fruto do seu trabalho, porque o governo taxa tanto e que torna tão impossível para você comprar determinados produtos, para você ter um bom carro, para você usufruir da liberdade do fruto do seu trabalho. Você não consegue. Você não precisa estar submetido a esse tipo de coisa. Você não precisa estar submetido a um país onde nada funciona, onde tudo é dor de cabeça, onde cada passo do seu dia é irritação. Dá para se livrar disso.
E às vezes você pode virar a chave da sua vida preenchendo um simples formulário. Às vezes é o primeiro passo. Eu preciso fazer alguma coisa, vou começar por onde? Eu te digo por onde. Preenchendo o formulário que aparece aí no QR Code que está aparecendo na tua tela ou clicando no link aí na descrição do vídeo. Então, às vezes, um simples gesto como esse, que você às vezes faz até meio que sem pensar, tá, eu vou preencher, mas sei lá o que vai acontecer, né? Às vezes acontece, é tudo. Às vezes a sua vida é completamente modificada para melhor. Imagina o impacto que isso pode vir a ter na sua vida daqui a algum tempo, dando certo. Então, não perca seu tempo, preencha o formulário, tá? Ainda que você vá pensar melhor depois. Tudo bem, preencha o formulário, pensa melhor depois, mas crie essa possibilidade para você. Crie essa possibilidade de uma vida melhor para você e a sua família. Tenha um plano B em mente. Não fique só contando com o Brasil, porque no momento, realmente, isso está muito perigoso. E a Imigrex está aqui para te oferecer esse plano B.
E eu estou chegando num ponto, Lud, onde eu estou começando começar a ver os primeiros frutos do trabalho dessa empreitada que a gente abriu e começando a ver essa coisa bacana de você trazer perspectiva, esperança para a vida das pessoas. Nós começamos isso para permitir que as pessoas tivessem esse plano B e agora a gente está começando a ver esses frutos. Então, isso é uma coisa que nos traz muita alegria, nos traz muita satisfação pessoal, e eu tenho certeza que em breve a comunidade brasileira nos Estados Unidos vai ser uma das, eu gosto de fazer essa comparação, né? Uma das grandes responsáveis por continuar brigando pelo Brasil, onde quer que a gente esteja. Eu acho que os judeus são os grandes exemplos para a gente nisso, né?
É isso. Tenho certeza que isso vai acontecer e sei que você vai ter grande participação nisso também.
Vamos tentar. Mais uma vez, obrigado pela sua audiência. Eu volto a dizer, é ridiculamente fácil preencher o formulário, e, como a Ludmila disse, pode ser o primeiro passo para você mudar a sua vida e para você continuar lutando pelo seu país. Você não abandone o Brasil, mas tenha um plano B para a sua vida, porque não dá para ficar esperando não, cara. Você não precisa ficar submetido a esse tipo de coisa. Até o nosso próximo encontro.
Tchau, tchau, gente.